Good evening, everybody. I'm Mr. Ivins, and I'm going to talk to you this evening about Year 10 and how it looks for them in terms of their GCSEs this year in GCSE numeracy and sort of English literature as well. Thank you all for muting your microphones. There'll be a short presentation from myself, and I'll hand you over then to the heads of faculties from English and Maths. And I just want you to be aware as well that this is recorded. We record all our meetings. The reason being, some parents can't make the meeting, and we will send this meeting out to them as a recorded, as a sort of link where only those with the link can access it. So it's quite a safe link that, it won't just be on YouTube. It will be a safe link for them to watch it themselves. Okay, so as you all know from the previous meeting that we had, and the letter has gone home, as I know explained in that all learners in Year 10 will be awarded a grade in English literature and GCSE maths numeracy. That is the plan as it stands. Things do change, but that's the plan as it stands. And we know that as a school we have certain expectations, and I spoke in the last meeting about how the home learning will have an impact on where the pupils are, more for the content that they're learning, and how this then will then transpire when they go on to, when we return to school, and they'll be doing even more work on the things they're learning now at home. So, we do expect, and this is the same for Year 11, who are going through the same process as this with their centre determined grades, but it's really important that they have a positive attitude to the work, and more importantly, all the work is submitted on time, so the pupils and teachers have the evidence to say they're working at that grade. So, pupils will know from their reports what grades they're working at currently, what they're currently predicting to get in certain subjects, especially in English and maths this year, as they will be awarded a centre determined grade, and they need to be working at that level to enable them to achieve that grade. And obviously, we did mention in the last meeting, it's really important that the pupils buy into this, because they have a great opportunity to be awarded 2 GCSEs this year, which they would have been entered for. And it's really important that they buy into that, because we don't want to be in a situation where pupils, are not entered for the exams, and I'm sure we won't come into that at all. But the aim of tonight's evening is to give you more information on the 2 subjects that I mentioned, English and maths numeracy, and they're going to go through a little bit about the subjects and what is required of the pupils in terms of topics, and how assessments may take place, and what things will be used for that. So I'll hand you over now to Mr. Astley, the head of maths, and he's going to talk to you about mathematics numeracy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Ivins. As he said, I'm the head of the maths faculty. I probably have met quite a few of you now, as I've been in the school, I think 8 years now. So it's quite likely that we've probably met over the last 4 years. I'm just going to run you through a few frequently asked questions, really, that tend to come up year after year for the maths and the maths numeracy qualifications. Before I start, can I just reiterate basically what Mr. Ivins said, that obviously this is our plan at the moment, but as with everything sort of this year, subject to change. Firstly then, the difference between the maths and the maths numeracy qualifications. Back in 2016, the Welsh Government decided that all learners in Wales would sit 2 qualifications, not just the traditional maths, which had run for many, many years. The idea being, I think, or the rationale behind it, is that they wanted learners to be equipped with numeracy skills for the real world. So with that in mind, they created an extra assessment. Now, in reality, it's very hard really to differentiate between the maths and the numeracy as teachers and as students. But there are some differences, certainly, with the way in which it's assessed. So the mathematics is very much like the traditional maths has always been. There's lots of algebra in there. Actually, the content is probably a lot harder in the mathematics exam as opposed to the numeracy. But the difficulty with the numeracy is that the style of question, it asks, there's much greater emphasis, on problem solving. It asks real-life questions where students are required to pick out the key information and the relevant skills in which to answer them. Traditionally, both have been 100% examinable, with one non-calculator paper and one calculator. Obviously, I'll explain a little bit more about how it'll be assessed this time as we go through the slides.
Sorry, sir, to interrupt. I don't know if it's just me, but it's very quiet when you're talking, and I've got my volume on full. But you seem very quiet. Mr. Ivans was the same. I don't know if it's me.
I do apologise. I'm not sure my mic is turned up at full volume, so.
Oh, right. Okay, no worries. I'll if I can't hear you properly, I'll listen to it on record later. All right, thank you.
Hi everyone. It was quiet for me at the start, but it seems to have sorted itself out now, so it might just work out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Perhaps my wife hasn't paid the internet bills again. I'll have to have a word. Secondly, then, how will pupils be assessed? So, as Mr. Ivans alluded to, 3 different ways really in which they will be assessed. Firstly, the WJC, or the exam board for us, they have given us guidance really on how to write classroom assessments for our return to school. Again, hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later, but again, plans do change, and this could affect on the type of assessment we are able to give our learners. But the idea being, or certainly the difference is to previous years, whereas the exams, the students have no idea about what's going to come up. We can only guess. At this time, we can sort of decide on the topics that will be assessed in line with the WJC guidance. We'll also be using sort of all the assessment data that we've gathered over the last 2 years. I mean, in reality, with maths and numeracy, pupils have been preparing for their GCSE since year 7, really. So we do have the information gathered over the last 2 years. And then thirdly, again, as Mr. Ivans said, the engagement and standard of home learning. Obviously, that will count towards the evidence, and it's one of the criteria that the exam board have set towards the centre determined grade. The next one, and usually as they sit the exam, it's sort of coupled with this question: are pupils able to resit? So what if a pupil is not happy with the grade that they've been given? So obviously this is a centre determined grade of what we think the level they're working at the end of year 10 would be. And there are some students who inevitably would perform better if they were to sit an exam at the end of year 11. For lots of our learners, they may have exactly the same. They may have reached their potential at the end of year 10. So if a child, wasn't happy with their grade, there would be the potential to resit at the end of year 11 in the 2022 exam series. Obviously, we would hope that doesn't happen, but traditionally, with all resits, the highest grade counts. My graph there, that was the maths geek sort of coming out in me. It was just to illustrate really that some potential learners, and the 3 curves represent 3 different learners. The first 2 have sort of reached the same grade that they would have at the end of year 10 as they would year 11. Obviously, the blue line at the bottom there shows perhaps someone who would have improved in year 11, so would benefit perhaps from resitting. How can pupils prepare? Well, firstly, and I think most importantly, is obviously having the regular contact with their teachers, completing all the work that is set, and attending the live lessons that are being delivered every week. Particularly for the numeracy exam, as I alluded to earlier, the problem solving element tends to be perhaps a sticking point for some of our learners. So to perhaps improve the performance in the numeracy exam, sort of practice the problem solving element. How do you do this? I mean, there's a plethora of resources available online. Within MathsWatch, which obviously the school is subscribed to, and if your child is partaking in the home learning, you'll be very used to using this website. there is actually a numeracy only section. So when you search for topics, there is an option just to search for the numeracy WJC exam. So I don't know how clearly you can see the screen here. It's quite small actually, but when you look at the qualification, if you put in GCSE there, automatically the WJC topics will come up, and it'll give you a drop-down option for numeracy. I've put on there some other useful websites, corbettmaths.com, drfrostmaths.com, and the WJC, which is the exam board. With regards to topics, traditionally our learners, depending on their class, would follow a scheme of work aligned to either the higher tier, the intermediate tier, or the foundation tier. The intermediate tier covers grades from B down to D, the higher tier A star to C, and then the foundation tier D and below. And depending obviously on the ability of the child, they would follow a different scheme of learning. Here are the topics for the intermediate tier, and the reason I've chosen the intermediate first is because it covers basically half of the foundation and half of the higher. So that's the intermediate tier. I'm not going to read through all of the topics now, obviously, but I think Mr. Longden is going to make this available to you at the end, so you can have a little look there, and perhaps take a photo of the screen. So that's the intermediate tier. The higher tier is exactly the same as the intermediate, with the addition of the topics there. And the foundation tier is slightly less content, and those are the topics there for the foundation tier. That's it for me for now, but if anybody does have any questions, obviously I'd be more than willing to answer at the end. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Astley. I'm going to hand you over now to Miss Amos, who is the head of English faculty. I think she's going to take control of the PowerPoint. Is that right, Miss?
Hi, yeah, Mr. Ivans. I'm trying to take control, but I can't actually move the slide. So you might have to move it for me if that's okay. If I stop control, are you able to move it across for me?
So let me see. I think
it's not working on my computer. Is that okay?
Yeah, I can do that. That's fine. Yeah.
Fab, thank you. Right, as Mr. Ivan said, I'm Miss Amos, the head of English at the school. I've been in touch with some of you across my time at Ponty High, and obviously I'm here this evening to just give you some information on the current changes now in line with the CDG, the Centre Determined Grades that we've now got to give the learners for English literature this year. So sir, if you can move the slide for me. Right, so firstly then, I sent a PowerPoint, sort of a voiceover PowerPoint, and I put it on YouTube in October just to give you information about what the course was going to look like this year for Year 10. So you should hopefully be aware that they were going to sit GCSE English Literature this year in 1 year. Now, this was new for us at Ponty High. We usually cover GCSE Literature and Language over 2 years. However, with obviously what the disruption that Year 10 and Year 11 sort of had last year, the WJC decided to drop one of the exams for literature this year, which meant that Year 10 pupils would only have to sit one exam and complete a controlled assessment. So this made complete sense to do literature in 1 year rather than over 2 years, and then over 2 years the pupils would have to sit an extra exam. Okay, so that's where we were at in September, and the 3 areas that you can see on the screen there now, highlighted in yellow, are what the pupils have been working on since September. So if I just take you through the first two first, the first two were for Unit 1, which was the January exam that the pupils would have sat if it wasn't cancelled. So they were working on Of Mice and Men, which was section A of the exam. And then we were looking at unseen poetry. So these were poems that the pupils wouldn't have seen before and that they would be presented with, could potentially be presented within in an exam, and they'd have to answer on them. So this was all, you know, sort of what we were preparing them for January. And then after January, we were planning to complete the poetry controlled assessment. So obviously the exam was cancelled, however our plan hasn't changed. So whatever the pupils have been completing since September is obviously going to be considered for our CDG evidence. And anything they produce right up until we have to obviously provide these grades to the exam board. So we continuing to work through the Unit 1 sort of prep. There's a typo there on the screen, and that should be number 2 should say Unit 1 Section B, not Unit 2 Section B. So yeah, we're continuing to work on the Mice and Men work, the unseen poetry, and then the poetry controlled assessment. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the content in a little bit more detail and the skills that we're covering on the next slide now. Thank you. So what you'll see on the screen then, I'm not going to take you through this word by word, and as Mr. Astley said, this will be available to you afterwards anyway, so you can have a little look at it yourselves then. But you've got the content going down the left-hand side there, and then you've got the skills focus on the right. So this is the plan that we put together, you know, as soon as we knew that there was going to be a lockdown in January and so on anyway, of what we were going to cover. And the WJC have produced guidance this week, and everything that we're planning is in line with what the WJC recommends. So I just want to reassure everyone of that. So Unit 1 then of Mice and Men Section A, the pupils are being asked to produce extract responses, which basically test their knowledge and understanding of one part of Mice and Men. So if you speak to your children at home, they'll tell you that they've been given different sections of Mice and Men, and then they have to respond and answer a question. And those questions are worth 10 marks. And then the pupils have also been preparing essays on Of Mice and Men, and they are based on the entire novel rather than just one section. So they might be based on a character or a theme, or the setting or the title of the novel, that type of thing. And those essay responses, 70% of those marks are for context. So the social and historical context, the background of Mice and Men being set in the 1930s and how that influences the writer. So your children are being made aware of all of this when we were in school from September, as well as, you know, in the present day now via live lessons and narrated PowerPoint. So that's the preparation for the Of Mice and Men section. And then we've got unseen poetry, where pupils are being tested on their ideas, their understanding of ideas in poems and the effect of language that's used. And these will be poems that they won't have seen before. The teachers would have started doing this with them in December. However, obviously our time in school got cut a little bit short when we closed a week before Christmas. And then obviously the teachers have then been sort of trying to pick back up with this then in January. But this is an area we will be focusing more on when we come back to school. Whenever that may be. And the pupils are being tested on making meaningful comparisons between two poems in that section as well. And then if you look at section 3, then Unit 3, that ties in really nicely with the unseen poetry preparation, where pupils have to complete an assessment where they compare two poems. Now, these poems have been given to us by the WJC, so we haven't got any choice in the poems that we give them. The pupils had to do a poem called In Cardigan Market, and then they had a choice of doing either of the other two poems you can see on the screen there. So Kindling on a Tractor or A Peasant. Now, as we were being closed for so many weeks, we were mindful of the fact that pupils haven't prepared anything for a controlled assessment, and that's what we would have been starting if we were in school in January. So we've been doing this preparation work all through January with Year 10. So they've been set tasks. I think it was right until the end of January. They had preparation on all of these poems. And then obviously this preparation work will now continue in the build up until we go back to school. I know some teachers are in a position to even actually complete the controlled assessment via, you know, live lessons as early as next week with some classes, whereas other classes have been given a little bit longer. So, you know, what Mr. Astley has already said there, you know, attendance to live lessons is really, really vital, and particularly when we are short on time and some of this content we're inevitably having to teach via live lessons and online learning. So it's really vital that pupils, you know, log in, see the work that's there and contact their teachers if they're a bit stuck with anything. And you can see the skills focus there for the controlled assessment is the same as the unseen poetry, where they're tested on the ideas and the effect of language in seen poems this time, because we will have shown them to them first, okay, and then they have to respond. and then they have to make meaningful comparisons, and this is going to be worth 50% of their controlled assessment. So that's why we've really tried to work on in January the skill of comparison, so that the pupils pick up the 50% of those marks. Okay, now the only controlled assessment that we are not completing, which is on the original literature course, is a Shakespeare one. Some schools might have started completing that in year 9 because they usually sit literature in a year, whereas this is all new to us. So we haven't got as far ahead as completing the Shakespeare controlled assessment. However, the guidance from the WJC says that as long as the assessment objectives are covered in the other things that you're teaching, then that's absolutely fine. So we are saving ourselves some time. We're not going into Shakespeare with them, and we're just covering all assessment objectives in these 3 different areas. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. That's a lot of information, and if there's anything there that you're a bit unsure of, if you can just sort of, my email address is going to be on the slides in a couple of slides time. So if you can just get in touch with me if there's anything that you need. So just to summarise then, what we're doing in the spring to summer term now in English is obviously getting their GCSE English Literature Centre determined grade completed by looking at Of Mice and Men and gathering evidence there with their extracts and essays, unseen poetry, and then the poetry controlled assessment through the spring term, and this is obviously at home and whenever we go back to school. And then I just wanted to pop up there as well, just to give you some idea of what we'll be looking at after the centre determined grades are done. In the summer term, we're going to look at completing the individual researched presentations the pupils will need to complete in year 11 for their GCSE language course. So we're trying to get a head start on year 11 as well, being mindful of the amount of time that's obviously been lost this year, and then we can focus much more then in year 11 on the reading skills and the writing skills that they need to do the GCSE English language at the end of year 11. Okay, so that's just a nice summary for you there to see what they'll be doing until the end of this year, basically. So just some, ways in which they can be supported at home at the moment and when they come back to school. You had this slide in October, but just purchasing copies of the study guides, the copy of Mice and Men, there's nothing more valuable than having their own copy of that text in front of them when they're doing this work. And I've also put a copy of my revision notes for English language on there. So if anyone wanted to get them, a head start for GCSE language for next year, that's a really useful revision guide for pupils, and you can purchase these on Amazon or eBay. Useful websites for literature at the moment. LitCharts is an app for free that you can download and type in the Of Mice and Men title, and it'll give you everything that you need for that. So if you've got pupils who don't like revision books, they can have an app. Bite Size is also really useful. YouTube has got so much on there for Of Mice and Men, and Spark Notes is really useful as well. Okay, so I'd recommend pupils using those, as well as, I've said it once already, but please get them logging on for live lessons. They have 1 live lesson in English every single week offered to them, more with some teachers. So just please make sure that they log on for those or watch the recording back if they've missed the lesson. Next slide. So just a quick reminder of all your child's English teachers are, okay? If you need to make a little note of that, if you were a bit unsure, they're there for you and there for you to refer back to after this meeting. And then last slide then is just my email address then, if anybody needs to email me, or you can ring me at the school and I can get back to you then with any concerns or any questions you've got. Okay, thank you very much for your time this evening.